Let's continue talking about nutrition of the breeding herd. Let's focus now on lactating sows. The lactation period in most farms around the world is somewhere between 21 to 28 days, and then there are several countries around the world that have some legal minimum number of days that the animals must have with the sows. Let's think about that the growth of these pigs are going to go from somewhere around 1.3 kilograms at birth to about 6 or 8 kilograms at weaning, depending on the length of the lactation period. And as we know, the longer the lactation period, then the heavier the pigs are going to be. The metabolic demands of the sows during this period are also pretty big. Why? Because she is producing a lot of milk, and this milk production, yes, it has a very genetic component, very heavy genetic component of the sow, but it's mainly driven by the ability of the piglets to suckle. If you have piglets that have a high drive for nursing, then the sow is going to produce more milk. The other thing that we know is that the amount of milk produced by sows is incredibly higher. They produce somewhere between 10 to 12 kilograms of milk per day. If we express that on a per kilogram of body weight basis, then we find out that sows produce more milk per unit of body weight than most highly efficient and highly selective dairy cows around the world. Therefore, that should give an indication that the sows have a high need of nutrients. And the first thing that we should not do is to restrict the feed intake of sows. To the contrary, we should be able to provide and incentivize these sows to consume as much feed as possible on a daily basis. Overall, pigs are going to grow at a rate of around 230 grams per day, more or less, depending on what conditions we have, the initial birth weight, and a lot of different factors. But this basically means that these 230 grams or so come 100% from milk production of the sows. And therefore, the nutrient needs of these animals are substantially higher because they have a very high or accelerated metabolism, and the mammary gland is just demanding at a great amount of nutrients in order to sustain that milk production. If the sow does not get all the nutrients that she needs to provide the adequate level of milk, what she is going to do is she's going to consume as much feed as possible, and then after that, in order to fill that void between what she can eat and what she needs, she is going to fill it by degrading her own body and using those store reserves that she had in place. And that's the main reason why sows tend to lose body weight during the lactation phase, because they're simply not consuming enough feed to sustain that milk production, to sustain that demand that the piglets are putting on the sow to provide the milk for the growth. One of the objectives that we should have is that we should be doing everything that we can in order to minimize that loss of body weight during the milk production phase for two main reasons. One, we want to make sure that the amount of milk production is not compromised by a restriction of nutrients. And two, we want to make sure that those sows, when they finish lactation, they're not too thin. If they're too thin, they're not going to be able and ready to rebreed and to enter back in estrus. And most likely we're going to spend a week or 2 or 3 or 4 or more trying to put body condition back on that sow while she is empty, and then trying to stimulate her body condition to go back to a normal state so she enters in estrus, and then she will have a proper ovulation rate for the next pregnancy. The other thing important to think about when we talk about lactating sows is to make a difference between first parity sow and then second parity sow. as I mentioned before, we need to keep in mind that these first-time sows, they're still growing animals, and therefore now in the lactating phase, they have high demand of nutrients to produce milk, but they still have a demand of nutrients for themselves to grow. So we are fulfilling here a dual requirement. Just like we were in gestation, we needed to provide nutrients for the fetuses and nutrients for the sow to grow. Here it's even more critical because now the production of milk, it's a very highly demanding metabolic process that occurs in a very short period of time, in a matter of literally 3 to 4 weeks. Therefore, we know the first party sows have a higher nutrient needs than older sows because they're still growing, and we need to do everything we can in order to stimulate that feed consumption. And because they cannot, most of the time, they cannot consume enough feed, then these animals will end up losing more body weight compared to older sows. Studies have indicated that the ideal amino acid profile that we use or should use to formulate diets in the sows, it's really heavily dependent on the amount of body weight loss that these sows will experience during the lactation. In this table, I have arbitrarily basically separated these in two main categories. Those that will lose, I'm going to say somehow, an acceptable or normal amount of body weight up to, let's say, 15 kilograms in 21 days. And those sows that you see highlighted over there in green that lose just an excessive amount of body weight. And then we can see that for those sows that lose an excessive amount of body weight, we have profound changes in the amino acid profile. If we look at threonine, for example, for the animals losing, I'm going to say, quote unquote, a normal amount of body weight lost, then the threonine requirement is around 60% of that of lysine. Whereas if we go to animals with excessive body weight loss, we're talking about 70 to 75% of the lysine requirement. And the same holds true for the rest, for the other amino acids. If we concentrate in the sows that are losing, let's say, a normal amount of protein, we can say that the ideal pattern of amino acids in these diets, it's going to be fairly similar or closer than to those sows that are exhibiting a drastic and unhealthy amount of body weight lost during the lactation period. So how do we manage these animals? Obviously, we need to do the proper feed formulation to make sure that we're providing the nutrients that these sows need. But most importantly than the formulation of the feed, we need to make sure that these sows are coming into lactation in a way that we're going to allow them to thrive. When we move them out of the gestation barn and put them into the farrowing barn, we need to make sure that these sows are washed, that they're clean, they're disinfected, that we're minimizing the potential of carrying any disease from the gestating barn into the farrowing house. We know that we need to move these sows at least 2 days before parturition so they have time to adapt to the new building, to the new conditions of housing conditions, the farrowing crates where they're going to be. And we need to start offering these sows lactation diet at free choice so they can make that change, and not only changes in palatability, but also knowing that they can eat as much feed as they want compared to when they were in gestation, that they have a restricted feeding program. The feed intake during lactation, as I mentioned, it's heavily related with the body condition store that the sow arrives at the farrowing house, and therefore we want to make sure that we have sows that coming in with the proper body condition, and we don't want sows with too high of a body condition, because like I mentioned before several times, higher body conditions at farrowing are going to be indicative of low feed intake and excessive weight loss during lactation. And this obviously is going to affect the ability of these sows to carry on the subsequent pregnancy, because they will need to spend extra time and we'll have to bring them back to a proper body condition before we can serve them again. Remember that the ideal or the thermoneutral temperature for the sow, it's going to be different from that of the piglets, and we all have seen how we provide supplemental heat to the piglets. We need to make sure that this supplemental heat is for the piglets and is not reaching the sow, because the sow needs to be kept as cool as possible. And like I mentioned several times, let's make sure that the sow has high quality of feed that is offered to her at all times without restriction. And this feed is important. This feed needs to be of high quality. And what I mean high quality is not only high quality of manufacturing at the feed mill, but also high quality of that feed in the feeder trough. That feed should not be wet, should not be moldy, should not be old. We need to make sure that we are looking at the feed that the sow has in front of them all the time and making sure that the quality of feed is maintained high until the point where she is going to consume it. Let's talk briefly about boars. Most commercial farms nowadays, they purchase semen to carry on artificial insemination throughout the herd. And then this is mainly because those boar studs, they have several lines of several genetic lines, different breeds. And then at the farm, we have concentrated more on the production of piglets and not necessarily on the production of boars. But when we look at boars and we look at the semen of boars, we need to make sure that we're addressing the issues that we need to address at the farm, whether that is with semen or with actually boars that we keep at the farm. And the issues are, do we have any structural issues? Do we have any performance issues? Do we want more growth rate, more protein deposition? Do we want more feed efficiency? Are we looking to improve meat quality? What is it that we are trying to improve genetically at the farm? And that is going to drive us to the selection of semen and boars. The current uses of boars in most commercial farms, we use them for heat detection. We use them to service those sows that were missed by the human crew, and then we also use them to provide olfactory stimuli for sows, mainly after weaning and for those replacement gilts, as the boar smelt has a positive effect on the sexual maturity of gilts and the ability of sows to go back in estrus again. If we review what we have seen so far, we can talk about, how do we feed a lactation sow? Well, the feed should be available at all times. And as we mentioned before, that feed needs to be fresh, needs to be available. It should not be wet, it should not be moldy, it should not be fermented. It's important, go and pick it up, smell it, it still should smell fresh, and all that is important in order to maximize the amount of feed that a sow will eat. What is the main management goal for lactating sows? We mentioned it several times, kind of indirectly, but basically what we want to do is we want to minimize the loss of body weight of these animals during the lactation period. Why primiparous sows have a higher nutrient requirements than multiparous sows? And that is because first party T sows, they're still growing compared to older party T sows, which we consider them to be more mature or adult animals. In summary, we talk about replacement gilts, and we need to start thinking about selecting replacing gilts as soon as possible. We need to make sure that these animals are going to be structurally sound and of good reproductive pedigree. And we need to separate these animals from the commercial animals as soon as possible, or a way to identify them if we're having a mixed production where we carry on the breeding herd is selected basically from the animals that are destined for commercial, or if at some point in time these animals get to commingle during the growing period of the animals. For gestating sows, I hope I convince you that it is highly critical and highly important that we use 2 different diet formulations during the gestation phase in order to maximize the ability primarily of the fetuses to grow during the last third of the gestation, and to make sure that we take those sows to the farrowing house in the proper body condition. And obviously throughout the gestation we need to minimize stressors, because we don't want to cause any fetal growth, or even to an extreme point to cause any abortion in these gestating animals. For lactating sows, we want to minimize the amount of body weight that they lose during lactation. The key components to that minimization of body weight loss is making sure that the sow has a proper body condition score when she enters the farrowing house, and that we provide high quality feed, free choice, and it's always available. And then by minimizing this body weight loss, we basically are maximizing our chances for that sow to enter in estrus in a proper amount of time after she gets weaned, and also to have a proper rate of ovulation for the subsequent litter